It was supposed to be a simple math class substitution until the principal's voice crackled over the intercom. Code red. This is not a drill. When the gunman entered room 204, the students saw their quiet substitute teacher transform into someone they never expected. Welcome to Vaulted Secrets. Before we begin this story of hidden identities, split-second decisions, and the moment when a classroom became a battlefield, tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered that someone ordinary was actually extraordinary? Sarah Mitchell was writing algebra equations on the whiteboard when her life as a substitute teacher intersected with her past as an FBI agent in the most violent way possible. She had been Mrs. Anderson that morning, a quiet, unremarkable woman in her early 40s who showed up to Jefferson High School with a coffee mug and a lesson plan for 9th grade mathematics. The real Mrs. Anderson was home with the flu, and Sarah had been covering substitute teaching assignments for 3 years now. It was the perfect cover, mundane, invisible, and constantly changing locations. No one looked twice at substitute teachers. No one remembered their names. No one asked questions about their backgrounds, which was exactly what Sarah needed. For 7 years, Sarah had been living under an assumed identity in the Federal Witness Protection Program. Her real name was Special Agent Sarah Chun, and she had spent 12 years with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. She had testified against a network of corrupt agents who had been selling classified information to organized crime families. The trial had ended with 14 convictions and Sarah's permanent relocation to a small town in Ohio, where she became Sarah Mitchell, substitute teacher, and tried very hard to forget that she had once been one of the Bureau's most skilled tactical response specialists. But on Tuesday morning, November 15th, room 204 at Jefferson High became the place where Sarah Mitchell's quiet life collided with Sarah Chun's lethal training. The day had started normally. 28 ninth graders shuffled into first period algebra, already bored before the bell rang. Sarah introduced herself as Mrs. Mitchell, not Mrs. Anderson, a small slip that none of the students noticed, but that made her pause for just a moment. She was getting too comfortable, dropping pieces of her real identity into her cover story. Today we're working on quadratic equations, she announced, turning to write the first problem on the board. Sarah had been teaching for exactly 18 minutes when she heard the first sound that didn't belong. Rapid footsteps in the hallway, moving too fast to be a late student or a teacher heading to the copy machine. Her hand paused halfway through writing the equation. Her body went still in a way that had nothing to do with math and everything to do with 7 years of tactical training that her nervous system had never forgotten. Mrs. Mitchell? Asked Emma Rodriguez, a bright student in the front row. You okay? Sarah forced herself to continue writing, but her ears were cataloging every sound in the building. The footsteps had stopped. There were hushed voices near the main office, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the kind of controlled urgency that meant something was very wrong. Then the intercom crackled to life with Principal Davidson's voice, and Sarah knew that her 3 years of peaceful anonymity were about to end. Attention staff and students. We are now under Code Red lockdown. This is not a drill. The classroom erupted into whispers and nervous laughter, the kind of half-scared, half-excited reaction that teenagers have to anything that breaks their routine. But Sarah wasn't listening to the students. She was listening to the building itself, and what she heard made her blood run cold. Gunshots. 3 of them, rapid succession, somewhere near the main entrance. While her students were still processing the announcement, Sarah was already moving. She walked calmly to the classroom door, turned the deadbolt, and flipped off the lights. All standard lockdown procedures that every teacher in America knew by heart. But then she did something that wasn't in any school safety manual. Sarah moved to her desk and opened the bottom drawer where she had kept a small emergency kit for the past 3 years. Inside was a burner phone, a tactical flashlight, and a Glock 19 that she wasn't supposed to have, but had never been able to give up. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Emma's voice was smaller now, scared. "What's happening?" "Everyone moved to the back corner, away from the door and windows," Sarah said quietly. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and carried a weight that made the students respond immediately instead of asking questions. As 28 teenagers huddled in the corner, Sarah checked her weapon and listened to the sounds of chaos spreading through the building. More gunshots, closer now, screaming, the sound of doors slamming and security alarms. Sarah pulled out the burner phone and sent a text to a number she hadn't used in 3 years. "Blown. Armed subject at Jefferson High. Need immediate extraction after resolution." The response came back in 30 seconds. "Negative on extraction until threat neutralized. You're the only trained responder on scene. Handle it." Sarah stared at the message and realized that the FBI was ordering her to break cover, abandon her new identity, and become Agent Sarah Chun again, not to save herself, but to save her students. She looked at the 28 scared faces watching her from the corner and made a decision that would end Sarah Mitchell's quiet life forever. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice taking on the command tone she hadn't used in 7 years. "My real name is Sarah Chun. I'm a federal agent, and I'm going to keep you safe. But I need you to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, without questions. Can you do that?" The students stared at her in shock. A few nodded. Emma raised her hand tentatively. "Are you really a teacher?" She whispered. "Today I am," Sarah replied. "But 7 years ago, I was someone who dealt with situations like this professionally." Another gunshot echoed through the building, much closer now. Sarah could hear the shooter moving methodically through the hallway, trying doors, looking for unlocked classrooms. "He's checking every room," Sarah said quietly. "This door is locked, but it won't stop him if he really wants to get in." "What do we do?" asked Marcus, a basketball player who suddenly looked much younger than his 15 years. Sarah looked at her students, kids who should have been worried about algebra tests and lunch plans, not survival. She thought about her orders, her cover, her responsibility to keep these children alive. "We're going to stop him," she said. Sarah had approximately 3 minutes to transform 28 terrified teenagers into a coordinated response team. It wasn't ideal, but she'd worked with worse odds before. "Emma, Marcus, come here," she said quietly. "You two are team leaders. I need you to divide everyone else into 2 groups. Group 1 goes to the supply closet. Group 2 behind my desk. If shooting starts in this room, you drop to the floor and stay down until I tell you otherwise." "Mrs. Mitchell," Emma started. "Agent Chun," Sarah corrected. "And we don't have time for questions right now." She moved to the windows and carefully checked the courtyard outside. Clear. Her phone buzzed with a text from building security. Shooter identified as Robert Mason, 17, expelled student. Armed with semi-automatic rifle. Last seen 2nd floor, heading toward math wing. Sarah's blood went cold. The math wing, her hallway. He was coming for them specifically. She looked at her students organizing themselves according to her instructions and realized that this wasn't random. Robert Mason had been in her class 3 weeks ago when she'd been substituting for Mrs. Patterson. He'd been disruptive, aggressive, and she'd had him removed by security. This was personal. "Change of plans," Sarah announced, her mind switching into tactical mode completely. "He's coming here specifically. This room is the target, not a random stop." The fear in the room became palpable. Several students started crying quietly. "But," Sarah continued, "that gives us an advantage. We know where he's going, which means we can be ready for him." She moved to the door and listened carefully. Footsteps in the stairwell, heavy boots, someone moving with purpose rather than stealth. He wanted to be heard. He wanted people to be afraid. "Marcus, how many kids play sports in here?" Sarah asked. 6 of us, Marcus replied immediately. Athletic tape in your backpack? Yeah, for my ankle. Good. Tape the door handle to the frame as tightly as you can. Make it impossible to turn. Sarah was moving around the room now, checking angles, identifying cover positions. Emma, art supplies. Spray paint, anything that affects vision. I have pepper spray, whispered Alyssa from the back corner. Perfect. Anyone else have anything that could be used defensively? The students began volunteering items. More athletic tape, a heavy textbook, scissors from the art station, even a fire extinguisher that Marcus remembered seeing in the supply closet. Sarah realized she was watching these kids transform from victims into defenders, and she felt a fierce pride that she hadn't experienced since her bureau days. Her phone buzzed again. Local PD ETA 8 minutes. SWAT ETA 15 minutes. Your point until they arrive. 8 minutes. She'd kept hostages alive for longer than that, but never while simultaneously protecting them and trying to maintain cover. Final positions, Sarah whispered. Groups 1 and 2, take cover exactly where I told you. No matter what happens, stay down until I say clear. If I go down, Emma's in charge. Wait for SWAT and do whatever they tell you. You're not going down, Marcus said firmly. It wasn't a question or a hope. It was a statement of fact from a 15-year-old who had decided to trust the woman who had been teaching him algebra 20 minutes earlier. Sarah looked at him and realized that these students weren't just her responsibility anymore. They were her team. The doorknob rattled. Robert? Sarah called through the door, her voice calm and professional. It's Mrs. Mitchell, from the substitute class 3 weeks ago. I'd like to talk to you. Silence. Then, you had me thrown out. I did, and I'd like to explain why, if you're willing to listen. Open the door. I can't do that, Robert, but I can talk to you through it. What's going on today? What made you decide to come back? Sarah was buying time, but she was also profiling. She could hear tension in his voice, exhaustion, the kind of emotional rawness that came from someone who had been planning this moment for weeks. They destroyed my life, Robert said. You destroyed my life. All of you. Tell me how, Sarah replied, positioning herself at an angle where she could see the door but had cover behind her desk. Help me understand. For the next 4 minutes, Sarah conducted the most important interview of her career through a classroom door, while 28 students watched her negotiate with someone who had already killed at least one person that morning. She learned that Robert had been expelled after the incident in her classroom led to a discovery of drugs in his locker. The expulsion had cost him his college scholarship, his girlfriend, and his relationship with his parents. In his mind, the substitute teacher who had called security was responsible for the complete destruction of his future. I understand why you're angry, Sarah said, and I understand why you blame me. But Robert, I need you to think about the students in this room. They didn't hurt you. They don't deserve to pay for what you think I did. Everyone pays, Robert replied. That's how justice works. That's when Sarah heard the sound that meant negotiation had failed. The click of a safety being released. Everyone down, she whispered to her students. Now, the first gunshot splintered the door frame. The second shattered the window in the door. The third blew apart the deadbolt that Marcus had reinforced with athletic tape. Robert Mason kicked open the door to room 204, semi-automatic rifle raised, and found himself face to face with FBI Special Agent Sarah Chun for the first and last time in his life. The engagement lasted exactly 14 seconds. Sarah had trained for situations like this dozens of times in FBI simulations, but never with 28 teenagers, depending on her accuracy under pressure. Robert entered the room scanning left, which gave Sarah the split-second advantage she needed. Her first shot hit his shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to drop the rifle. Her second shot hit his leg, dropping him to the floor. She was moving before he hit the ground, kicking the rifle away and placing him in restraints. "Clear," she called to her students. "Everyone stay where you are until police arrive." But as sirens wailed in the distance, and her students slowly emerged from their hiding places, Sarah realized that nothing would ever be clear again. Her cover was blown, her identity was exposed, and 28 people now knew that their substitute teacher was someone completely different than she had pretended to be. Emma was the first to approach. "Agent Chun," she said quietly, "are we safe now?" Sarah looked at the girl who had trusted her completely during the most terrifying 15 minutes of her young life. "You're safe," she said. "You're all safe. What happens to you now?" Marcus asked. Sarah didn't answer because she didn't know. Within an hour, the school was surrounded by federal agents, local police, and media crews. Sarah's FBI handler arrived to debrief her and discuss next steps for her protection status. But before any of that happened, 28 ninth graders made a pact that would define the rest of Sarah's life. "We don't know anything," Emma announced to the group as they waited to be interviewed by police. "Mrs. Mitchell was a substitute teacher who kept us safe during a school shooting. That's all we know." "But she told us her real name," one student pointed out. "No," Marcus said firmly. "She told us her name was Sarah Mitchell. She said she had training because she used to work security or something. We don't know anything about FBI or agents or any of that." One by one, 28 teenagers agreed to protect the identity of the woman who had protected them. When police interviewed them, they described a substitute teacher who had acted bravely under pressure, who had talked to the shooter and somehow convinced him to surrender. They didn't mention the gun. They didn't mention the tactical response. A week later, Sarah received new identity documents and relocation orders. She was being moved again, this time to a small town in Montana, where she would become Sarah Davis, part-time librarian. On her last day in Ohio, she received 28 identical cards, each with the same message. "Thank you for keeping us safe. We'll never forget you, Mrs. Mitchell." Emma's card had an additional note. "I want to study criminal justice in college now. Because of you." Marcus had written, "You taught me that heroes look like regular people until the moment they need to be heroes." Sarah realized that in trying to save these students, they had somehow saved her too. For 7 years, she had been living in hiding, afraid of her past, disconnected from her purpose. But in room 204, for 15 minutes, she had remembered who she was and why that mattered. 6 months later, Sarah Davis was working at the town library in Montana when she received a newspaper clipping in the mail. It was an article about Jefferson High School's graduation ceremony, where the class of 2024 had dedicated their graduation to Mrs. Mitchell, the substitute teacher who showed us what courage looks like. The article mentioned that several graduates were pursuing careers in law enforcement, inspired by a teacher who had demonstrated grace under pressure during a crisis situation. Emma Rodriguez was quoted. "She taught us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they have to. That's the most important lesson anyone ever taught me." Sarah kept the article in her desk at the library, next to the emergency kit she still maintained out of habit. She had learned that some secrets were worth keeping, some identities were worth protecting, and some students became the teachers. 2 years later, Sarah Davis received a visitor at the Montana Library. Emma Rodriguez, now a college junior studying criminal justice, had tracked down her former substitute teacher to say thank you in person. "I knew you weren't really just a teacher," Emma said quietly as they sat in the library's reading room. "The way you moved, the way you talked to him, the way you kept us all calm, that wasn't just training, that was experience." "I was a teacher that day," Sarah replied. "That's the only part that mattered. Will you tell me what you really did before you were a teacher?" Sarah looked at the young woman who had been 15 years old when they first met in room 204, who had trusted her completely during the worst day of both their lives. I helped people when they couldn't help themselves, Sarah said finally, just like I did that day. Emma nodded, understanding that this was as much of the truth as she was going to get. I'm going to do that too. Help people. Because you showed me it was possible. After Emma left, Sarah realized that her impact had rippled far beyond that single day in November. She had helped create the next generation of people who would stand between danger and innocence, who would choose to protect rather than hide. That evening, Sarah updated her emergency kit for the first time in 2 years. Not because she expected trouble, but because she had remembered something important. Some skills are too valuable to let rust, and some responsibilities never really end. She was Sarah Davis, librarian, who helped people find the books they needed. But she was also still Sarah Chun, protector, who helped people when they couldn't help themselves. And sometimes, like on Tuesday morning in room 204, those two identities became the same person. Jefferson High School now has a memorial plaque outside room 204, dedicated to the ordinary people who do extraordinary things when others need them most. Marcus Johnson became a police officer. Emma Rodriguez graduated from the FBI Academy. 12 other students from that algebra class chose careers in public service, all of them citing the same inspiration: a substitute teacher who showed them what courage looked like when it mattered most. Sarah Davis still works at the library in Montana. She still keeps an emergency kit in her desk. And every November 15th, she receives 28 cards from around the country, each with the same message: "Thank you for keeping us safe, Mrs. Mitchell." Because some teachers change your life by teaching you algebra. And some teachers change your life by teaching you that ordinary people can be heroes when someone needs them to be. The best lessons aren't always in textbooks. Sometimes they're learned in moments when someone decides that protecting others is more important than protecting themselves. So now I ask you, have you ever encountered someone ordinary who turned out to be extraordinary? Have you ever seen courage in unexpected places? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Vaulted Secrets. We're here to explore the hidden heroes, the ordinary people with extraordinary pasts, and the moments when someone's secret identity becomes the thing that saves lives. Because the person sitting next to you might be someone you never expected.